It started like any other quiet morning. The air outside was calm, and the sunlight came through the curtains in soft golden lines, filling the little kitchen with a warm glow. She stood by the window with a cup of tea in her hands, watching the street slowly come to life. A delivery truck passed by. A man walked his dog across the road. Someone waved from the corner and she nodded back politely, the way neighbors do when they see each other every day but don't really know one another. She liked mornings like this. Peaceful. Predictable. There was something safe about routines. They made her feel steady, like nothing could catch her off guard. She took a small sip of her tea and glanced at the clock on the wall. She had a list of things to do that day. Grocery shopping, a bit of cleaning, maybe call a friend in the evening. Nothing unusual. But just as she placed the cup on the table, a faint sound came from outside. It was the sound of something sliding into the mailbox. She almost ignored it. Usually it was just bills, flyers, or some advertisement she'd toss into the bin. But something inside her told her to check. She slipped on her slippers and walked to the door, pulling it open. The air felt a little cooler outside. She looked down at the small silver mailbox fixed near the gate and saw a single envelope inside. No stacks of papers. No loud colors. Just one plain envelope. She picked it up slowly, almost too carefully. The paper was slightly yellowish, like it had been kept somewhere for a long time. Her eyes moved to the handwriting on it. There was no printed address, no sticker, no sign of being sent through a company. Just a few words written in handwriting that seemed familiar. Her chest tightened for a second. It wasn't a name she recognized, but something about the way the letters curved made her uneasy. She turned it over in her hands. No stamp, no sender's name, nothing. Just her address and her name written with care. It didn't look like junk mail. It didn't look like anything ordinary. And in that moment, something shifted inside her. The morning no longer felt calm. The air around her felt heavier, almost like the world had quietly changed without telling her. She stepped back inside, closing the door behind her. Her hands were a little colder now. She set the envelope on the kitchen table, right next to her half-finished cup of tea. She sat down in the chair but didn't touch it again. She just stared at it, as if the envelope could explain itself if she looked long enough. Her heartbeat had started to quicken, and she didn't even know why. For years, she had lived with the idea that some things should stay buried. There were memories she never allowed to rise to the surface. They belonged to another time in her life, a time she never spoke of. Even with the people closest to her, she kept that part of her past locked away. And yet here it was again, sitting on her kitchen table in the form of a thin, quiet envelope. She tried to convince herself it was nothing. Maybe someone sent it by mistake. Maybe it was from an old friend. Maybe it was some small thing that didn't matter at all. But deep down she knew better. She could feel it in her bones. That sense you get when something old is about to come knocking. She brushed her fingers over the paper. It was smooth but firm, and the edges were a little uneven, like it had been handled more than once before reaching her. She pushed her chair back a little and stood up, pacing across the small kitchen. She glanced at the clock again. Time seemed slower now. The ticking sound of the clock grew louder, filling the silence. She kept turning her head toward the letter, as if it was pulling her in. She felt like a thread had been quietly tied around her heart, tugging her closer. She remembered the last time she received a letter that wasn't a bill. It was many years ago. That letter had changed everything in her life. It came at a time when she was already fragile, and the words inside had cut through her like a sharp blade. She had promised herself back then she wouldn't let anything surprise her like that again. She had built walls. She had learned to smile even when things hurt. She had learned to live without certain answers, but she wasn't prepared for this moment, not now. Not when life had finally become quiet. She walked back to the table and pulled the envelope toward her. She turned it around one more time. Her name stared back at her, written so softly, so carefully, that it almost felt personal, too personal. She ran her thumb over the letters and felt the faint rise of the ink. Whoever wrote this had taken their time. This wasn't rushed. This wasn't careless. It was deliberate. She sat again, resting her elbows on the table. The chair creaked softly beneath her. The sunlight had shifted a little, now landing directly on the envelope, making it look brighter than everything else in the room. She thought of calling someone, maybe just to distract herself, but she didn't. This didn't feel like something she could share right away. It felt private. It felt like it was meant for her and her alone. She pressed her palms together, trying to calm her racing thoughts. She tried to breathe slowly. She tried to remind herself that a letter was just paper. Ink and paper. It couldn't hurt her unless she let it. But her hands were shaking, and when she reached for her cup again, she realized the tea had gone cold. She didn't open the envelope. Not yet. Instead, she let her mind wander. Who would send something like this? Could it be a family member she hadn't heard from in years? Could it be from someone who once meant everything to her? She had spent years closing certain doors, never expecting them to open again. But sometimes life doesn't wait for your permission. Sometimes it finds a way to put the past right in front of you, whether you're ready or not. She traced the edge of the paper with her nail. Her eyes softened for a moment, and a memory slipped through, one she hadn't thought of in so long. A warm summer afternoon, a familiar voice. The sound of laughter she could still remember even after all this time. It hit her unexpectedly, like a wave rolling in quietly and pulling the sand from under her feet. She blinked fast, pushing the memory away. This wasn't the time to get lost in the past. She had spent too many years learning how to keep those feelings tucked away. She wouldn't fall apart over a piece of mail. She told herself that over and over, but her heart didn't believe her. Outside, a car engine started. A child laughed somewhere down the street. The world was still moving, but inside her kitchen everything felt still. Her fingers rested lightly on the flap of the envelope now. She hadn't decided whether to open it, but she couldn't walk away from it either. It was like the letter itself had changed the air around her. She picked it up once more and held it close to her face, studying the ink, the strokes, the weight. Her mind tried to place the handwriting, matching it to faces she had long pushed to the back of her memory. And then it hit her, a tiny flicker of recognition. She didn't know for sure, but the shape of the letters reminded her of someone whose absence had left a hollow space in her life. Her breath grew shallow. She set the letter down again. Her hands covered her mouth as she tried to steady herself. She hadn't said that person's name out loud in years. She hadn't even allowed herself to imagine that voice. And now, after everything, a simple letter on an ordinary morning was threatening to bring it all back. She leaned back in the chair and closed her eyes. If she opened it now, her life might change again. If she left it closed, she could pretend everything was still the same. It was strange how one thin piece of paper could hold so much weight. The minutes stretched on. She could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator, the soft ticking of the clock, the distant chirping of birds outside. But underneath all those ordinary sounds, there was something else, the quiet pounding of her heart, louder than anything else. She reached out, brushing her fingertips against the paper again, almost as if asking it for permission. She still didn't open it, but in her chest she already knew this wasn't just a letter. It was a door she thought would stay closed forever. And now it was waiting for her to decide. The morning sun shifted again and the shadow on the table grew longer. She wrapped her arms around herself and let out a shaky breath. No matter how much she tried to keep her life steady, something from the past had found its way back, and deep down she knew, whatever was written inside that envelope wasn't small. It was something that would change everything. She didn't open it yet, but the moment was coming, and she could feel it in the way her heart refused to calm down, in the way her hands couldn't stay still, and in the way the world seemed to hold its breath with her. The letter sat on the table all morning, untouched yet impossible to ignore. She moved around her apartment, trying to focus on small tasks, washing the dishes, tidying up the living room, watering the plants, but her eyes kept drifting back to it. Every time she passed the kitchen, her gaze would linger. The envelope felt alive somehow, as if it was quietly waiting for her, humming with the weight of the past she thought she had buried. She thought about leaving it for later, telling herself she would open it in the evening when she could prepare herself. But something in her chest told her that later would never come. She couldn't ignore it any longer. She had spent too many years pretending that questions didn't exist, that the gaps in her memory didn't matter. The envelope was forcing her to face them now, whether she wanted to or not. Her mind wandered back to her teenage years, a period she rarely revisited. It was a time filled with confusion, longing, and moments that had left deep marks. She had been young and naive, believing that people she trusted would always be there. But life had other plans. People had left. Promises had been broken, and she had learned to adapt, to hide her feelings, to grow stronger in silence. She had built walls so carefully that even she sometimes forgot what lay behind them. Yet here she was, confronted by something that could tear those walls down in a single moment. The handwriting on the envelope, so familiar, so deliberate, reminded her of someone she had once loved deeply, but had lost under circumstances that had never been fully explained. She hadn't seen or heard from that person in years, and yet the memory of them was alive, vivid as if it had been waiting quietly to reappear. She sat down at the table again, the envelope resting in front of her. She traced the edge with her fingertips, feeling the weight of the paper, the way it bent slightly under her touch. Every time she did, a tiny flicker of memory crossed her mind. Summer afternoons filled with laughter, the smell of rain on the pavement, conversations whispered in the dark, promises made and broken. For a moment she felt the pull of old emotions, the warmth and the pain mixed together, impossible to separate. Her hands were trembling now, but she couldn't bring herself to open the letter yet. Not fully. She wanted to, but the thought of what might be inside scared her more than anything. Years of unanswered questions and silent pain had left her wary. The past had taught her that some truths could hurt, that some revelations could shatter the fragile sense of control she had built over herself. And yet, something in her told her that this letter was different. It wasn't meant to hurt her. It was meant to explain. She thought about the people she had trusted over the years. How many times had she been left wondering, waiting for answers that never came? How many times had she forced herself to move on, pretending that the absence of closure didn't matter? Too many. And now, finally, it seemed that closure, or at least a version of it, had arrived at her doorstep. Her eyes softened as she remembered small details from her past. She remembered the way the sunlight had fallen on the old street where she used to play, the laughter that had once filled her house, and the warmth of a presence she had missed every day since it vanished. Those memories had been tucked away in a quiet corner of her mind, rarely visited. But the envelope had awakened them. It had pulled them forward, making them impossible to ignore. The sound of her own breathing filled the room. It was steady, but it carried the weight of anticipation. She felt the pull of the past, the urge to confront it, and the fear of what that confrontation might bring. She thought about how life had changed since those years. She had learned to be independent, to rely on herself, to face challenges without expecting anyone else to save her. And yet some part of her still longed for understanding, for explanation, for the person who had vanished and left questions behind. Finally, she reached for the envelope again. Her hands shook more than before, and her heart felt like it was trying to leap out of her chest. She held it carefully as if it were fragile glass. The familiar handwriting seemed to beckon her, drawing her in, whispering promises of truth and revelation. She paused for a long moment, closing her eyes, trying to prepare herself for whatever was inside. She thought about the first line she might read. What if it revealed something she wasn't ready for? What if it changed her understanding of everything she had believed about the past? Her mind raced with possibilities, some hopeful, some painful, but she knew she couldn't stop herself. Not anymore. The pull was too strong, the need for answers too pressing. With a deep breath, she finally broke the seal of the envelope. The paper inside felt thick and slightly textured, different from the smooth envelope. She unfolded it slowly, careful not to tear it. The room seemed to hold its breath with her. Time slowed down. Every sound outside, the hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the clock, the distant voices of people on the street, faded into the background. All that mattered was the paper in front of her. She read the first line, and just like that, her world shifted. The words were familiar, almost unbearably so. They carried the voice of the person she had thought she would never hear from again. Every letter seemed to hum with emotion, every word dripping with meaning. She felt a lump in her throat, a mix of relief, sorrow, and disbelief. Her hands trembled as tears began to form in her eyes. The first line alone was enough to bring years of suppressed emotion crashing down. Memories she had carefully buried rushed forward, overwhelming her senses. She saw their face in her mind, heard their voice, felt the warmth of their presence as if they were standing right in front of her. The emotions she had kept hidden for so long, grief, longing, regret, and love, flooded back in an unstoppable wave. She sank back into her chair, clutching the letter to her chest. Her body shook with the intensity of her feelings. For a long moment she couldn't speak, couldn't move, couldn't breathe properly. The tears came freely, slipping down her cheeks, soaking the paper slightly. She didn't care. She had held so much inside for so long, and it all needed to come out. When she finally managed to calm herself enough to look at the letter again, the words seemed to leap off the page with new meaning. The person who had vanished years ago was explaining themselves. They were telling her things she had never known, revealing truths that had been hidden behind years of silence. There was an apology, a confession, and a plea for understanding. Every word struck her with precision, cutting through years of confusion and doubt. She read on slowly, savoring each word despite the ache it brought. She felt her heart twist and turn with every line, the weight of the past settling on her shoulders. She remembered the longing she had felt every day since that person disappeared, the unanswered questions that had haunted her, and the dreams she had built on assumptions and half-truths. Now, for the first time, she was seeing everything clearly. The letter revealed sacrifices she had never known about, decisions made to protect her that had seemed like abandonment at the time. It explained actions that had hurt her, actions that she had resented, but now she understood their intention. The mixture of relief and sorrow was overwhelming. She realized that what she had perceived as desertion had actually been care, hidden behind circumstances she could not have known. She held the letter close, pressing it to her face as if trying to feel the presence of the person who had written it. The tears continued to fall, but they no longer carried only pain. They carried understanding, forgiveness, and the first hint of healing. For the first time in years, she felt a sense of connection to the person she had missed so dearly. Hours seemed to pass without her noticing. The sunlight shifted, shadows lengthened, and the day moved forward, but she remained seated, absorbed in the letter. She reread passages, paused to absorb the meaning, and allowed herself to remember everything she had tried so hard to forget. It was exhausting, but it was also liberating. She realized that the past had not been lost. It had been waiting for this moment, for the chance to be understood. By the time she finally put the letter down, her hands were damp, her cheeks streaked with tears, but her heart felt lighter. The initial shock had passed, replaced by a sense of clarity she had not felt in years. The person who had disappeared was not gone in the way she had imagined. They were here, in words, in explanation, and in the hope of reconciliation. She sat quietly for a long while, staring at the table, letting the emotions settle. The apartment was silent except for the ticking of the clock, but it no longer felt oppressive. It felt full, alive with the weight of history and the promise of understanding. She realized that the journey was only beginning. The letter had opened a door, but walking through it, facing the past and reconnecting with the person who had once been so important, would take time. But for now, she allowed herself to breathe. She allowed herself to feel. She allowed herself to understand that some answers, when they finally come, can change everything. Not by erasing the past, but by helping you see it clearly for the first time. And in that quiet apartment, with the letter resting gently on the table before her, she felt the stirrings of hope, a hope that the past, no matter how painful, could become a bridge rather than a wound. A hope that the person she had missed all these years was not lost, only waiting to be found in words and understanding. The days after she read the letter felt strange and heavy, like the world had shifted slightly, but nothing around her had changed. She went about her routine, but every little sound and movement reminded her of the letter and the person who had written it. The first line she had read kept echoing in her mind, as if it had a heartbeat of its own. She had thought she had moved on from the past, that she had closed the doors carefully and built walls strong enough to last forever. But the letter had shaken them. It had reached through her defenses, pulling old memories and feelings into the open, demanding attention. She carried the envelope with her wherever she went in the apartment. Sometimes she would hold it close to her chest, and sometimes she would lay it on the table and stare at it for minutes at a time. She reread it several times, each time noticing something new, a subtle detail she had missed before. The words were simple, but they carried a weight that was almost unbearable. She could feel the writer's emotions in every sentence, the longing, the regret, the love, the sorrow. It was as if they were speaking to her directly, across the years that had separated them. At night she would lie awake in bed, turning the words over and over in her mind. The letter had opened wounds she had thought had healed, and yet it also offered a strange kind of comfort. It was proof that the person had never forgotten her, that they had been thinking of her even when life had forced them away. She felt a mix of emotions, sadness for the years lost, relief for the truths revealed, and a quiet hope that maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late. She tried to talk to someone about it, a close friend she trusted, but found that words weren't enough. How could she explain the feeling of recognition that washed over her when she first read the letter? How could she describe the rush of memories that had come back so vividly, the ones she had tried to lock away? Her friend listened politely, nodding but could not feel what she felt. It was a solitude she had to bear alone, a journey that only she could take. The letter mentioned details about the past that she had never known, choices that had been made, sacrifices that had been kept secret, moments when the person had tried to protect her in ways she could not have understood. Reading those lines, she felt her heart swell and ache at the same time. It was a mixture of sorrow and gratitude, confusion and clarity. For years she had carried the weight of misunderstanding, believing she had been abandoned, believing she had been forgotten. But now she saw it differently. Now she saw that love could exist even in absence, that care could be hidden behind distance, and that sometimes life forces people apart even when their hearts are entwined. Days passed, and with each one the pull of the letter grew stronger. She began to feel an almost physical urge to act, to do something about the words she had read. She couldn't leave them sitting there untouched as if they were just memories. They were real, tangible, waiting to be faced. She began to consider the possibility of reaching out, of responding, of seeing the person again. The thought filled her with fear and excitement at the same time. Fear of what might happen, fear of disappointment, fear of old pain returning, excitement for the chance to reconnect, to finally have answers, to close a chapter that had been left open for far too long. She began to imagine what it would be like to see them again. What would they look like after all these years? Would the warmth she remembered still be there in their eyes, or had life changed them too much? Would they recognize her, or would she be a stranger in their eyes? Her mind spun with questions, each one more difficult than the last. And yet she felt a deep, undeniable need to know, to see, to understand fully. One afternoon, she finally made a decision. She would not wait any longer. She would go to the address mentioned in the letter. She would face whatever came her way, prepared for both joy and sorrow. She packed a small bag with essentials, trying to keep her movement steady, but her hands trembled with anticipation. Every step she took toward leaving her apartment felt heavy with emotion, as if she were carrying the weight of years in her shoulders. On the journey, memories flooded back again. She remembered the last day she had seen them, the words left unsaid, the lingering questions that had haunted her dreams. She remembered the times she had imagined this reunion in her mind, practicing what she might say, hoping she wouldn't break down too soon. And now, with each passing mile, the imagined became real. The thought of standing in front of them made her heart race, made her hands clammy, made her chest tighten. Finally, she reached the small house where the letter had said she would find them. She stood outside for a long moment, hesitant to knock, hesitant to ring the bell. Her mind replayed every memory, every word, every emotion tied to this person. She felt the urge to turn around and run, to retreat into the safety of her routine, but she knew she couldn't. She had come this far. The past had followed her here, demanding to be faced. With a trembling hand, she pressed the doorbell. The sound echoed through the quiet neighborhood, and she stepped back, holding her breath. Moments later, the door opened. And there they were. Older, yes, changed by the years, but unmistakably them. Her eyes filled with tears as she looked at the face she had imagined countless times. Their eyes met hers, and for a moment words were unnecessary. The silence held everything. The longing, the sorrow, the love, the regret. They stood there for what felt like an eternity, simply looking at each other. And then slowly they stepped forward. She felt herself trembling, her chest tightening with emotion she couldn't contain. And when they finally embraced, it was as if all the years of separation melted away. The warmth she had remembered was still there, the familiarity, the bond that had never truly broken. They pulled back slightly, looking into each other's eyes, both of them trying to find the right words. She reached into her bag and took out the letter, holding it out to them. They read it again silently and nodded. No words were needed. The letter had said everything that needed to be said, but seeing each other, feeling the presence of the other person, brought it to life in a way the paper never could. For the first time in years, she felt a sense of peace. The past was no longer a collection of unanswered questions. The memories that had haunted her were no longer shadows but a bridge to understanding. She realized that the letter had been more than just words on paper. It had been a key, unlocking the possibility of reconciliation, of forgiveness, of moving forward. They spent hours talking, sharing everything that had been left unsaid, filling in the gaps of years apart. They laughed, they cried, they held each other, and slowly the weight of the past began to lift. She realized that while the letter had started this journey, the real healing came from facing each other, from speaking, from being present in the moment. By the end of the day, they sat together quietly, simply holding hands, letting the silence speak for itself. The journey had been long, painful, and full of uncertainty, but standing there she finally understood something important: that love, care, and connection do not vanish with time or distance. They may be hidden, they may be delayed, but they endure, waiting for the right moment to be recognized. As the sun set and the sky turned shades of pink and gold, she felt a sense of closure she had never known before. The past had been acknowledged, the wounds had been faced, and the future, uncertain as it was, felt possible again. The letter, once a source of shock and emotion, had led her to this moment. A reunion that healed more than words could capture, a reconciliation that restored a part of her she had thought lost forever. And though the journey was far from over, she knew that she had taken the most important step, confronting the past, embracing it, and letting it guide her toward the possibility of a new beginning. After the reunion, she thought she had understood everything. She thought the letter and the meeting had answered all the questions she had carried for years. But life, she realized, rarely hands you the full picture all at once. There were layers she hadn't expected, truths hidden behind choices and silence, and only now was she beginning to see the depth of what had been left unspoken. The letter still rested on the table between them. She had kept it close, rereading lines that felt heavier now than they had when she first opened it. There were sentences she had skimmed before, lines she had not fully absorbed. Now, in the quiet of the house with the person sitting across from her, she noticed everything: the pauses between words, the subtle phrasing, the way certain emotions were hinted at without being named. It was as if the letter had been waiting for this moment, waiting for her to be ready to understand fully. She reached for it, unfolding it carefully. Her hands were steadier now, but her heart still raced. Each word she read seemed to carry more weight than before. She began to notice the sacrifices the person had made, choices that had caused pain, decisions taken to shield her from danger she hadn't even known existed. For years she had interpreted their absence as neglect, as abandonment, but now she saw it differently. It had never been neglect. It had never been lack of care. It had been protection, wrapped in secrecy, burdened by circumstances she could not have imagined. Tears came again, quietly this time, not from shock, but from understanding. She realized how heavy the world had been on their shoulders, how every step they had taken had been measured, often at the expense of their own comfort, their own desires, and all of it had been tied to her, to keeping her safe, to making sure she could grow without the weight of their struggles pressing down on her. They watched her silently, their own eyes wet, waiting. She wasn't sure if she needed to speak. Words felt inadequate, small compared to the truth unfolding before her. Yet slowly she began to speak, her voice trembling at first. She asked the questions she had held inside for so long, the ones she had been afraid to ask, the ones that had kept her awake at night for years. Why had they left? Why had they stayed away? What had happened that she didn't know? And one by one they answered. They explained the circumstances that had forced them to make decisions she could barely imagine. They described the fear, the uncertainty, the dangers they had faced. They spoke of the moments they had longed to return, the times they had wanted to reach out but couldn't, the nights they had spent thinking of her, hoping she would understand. Every word was heavy with honesty, every pause filled with emotion. As she listened, a strange combination of relief and sorrow washed over her. Relief that the person had not abandoned her for lack of love, sorrow for the years lost, for the misunderstandings, for the loneliness she had endured. Yet beneath all that, there was a growing sense of gratitude, a deep, Quiet appreciation for the sacrifices made, the care shown, even if it had been hidden. The letter had been the doorway, but this conversation was the key. It was in hearing their voice, seeing their expressions, feeling their presence that she truly understood. She realized that forgiveness was not just about saying the words. It was about feeling them, living them, allowing the truth to reshape her heart. She realized that understanding required patience, listening, and a willingness to see the other side of the story, even when it hurt. They talked for hours, covering years in a single afternoon. She asked about the smallest details, the choices that had seemed mysterious or cruel, and they explained, often with tears in their own eyes. She began to see the human side of it, the fear, the doubt, the love, the vulnerability. For years she had held onto a narrative that left her hurt and angry. Now she saw a different narrative, one filled with complexity, compassion, and courage. The more she learned, the more she realized how much she had misunderstood. It wasn't just about absence, it was about protection. It wasn't just about distance, it was about love. Every moment of confusion, every tear she had shed, every night she had spent wondering why they had disappeared, it all made sense now. The letter and the conversation had pulled back the curtain, revealing the full picture of a story she had only glimpsed before. She felt a deep gratitude, not just for the answers, but for the honesty. They had not hidden anything this time. Every secret, every difficult truth, every fear had been shared, and she saw the courage it had taken to do so. It made her own fears, her own anger, her own grief feel smaller, manageable. She understood that people make choices in life that are not always understood immediately. Sometimes the reasons are buried in circumstances too heavy to share. By the evening, the sun was low, casting a golden glow through the windows. They sat together, the letter still between them, and the silence was not empty. It was full of shared understanding, of empathy, of connection renewed. She reached out and took their hand, feeling the warmth, the familiar energy that had never truly left. It was grounding, a reminder that despite the years and the distance, the bond they shared was still alive. She realized something important in that moment. The past does not have to define the future. Pain and misunderstanding do not have to leave permanent scars if there is honesty, if there is willingness to see the truth, if there is courage to forgive. She understood that life is complicated, and people are imperfect, but love, care, and connection can endure through time and distance if one allows it. They began to make plans to rebuild their relationship slowly. There was no rush, no expectation to erase the years, but a commitment to understanding, to presence, to communication. They spoke of the future carefully, mindful of the lessons learned from the past. She felt hope stirring in her chest, a gentle light that had been absent for so long. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine a future that included them, not in the shadows of memory, but in the reality of today. The letter, once a source of shock and tears, had become a symbol of truth, a bridge between the past and the future. It had forced her to confront emotions she had hidden, to face questions she had feared, and to understand the depth of love and sacrifice in ways she never expected. And now, with the conversation behind her and the person sitting in front of her, she realized that the journey was no longer just about the past. It was about what came next. She leaned back in her chair, taking a deep breath, letting the emotions settle. She felt a quiet peace that she had not known in years, a calm born from understanding and acceptance. The wounds of the past had been acknowledged, and while they did not disappear, they no longer held power over her. They had been transformed by truth, by love, and by the courage to face them fully. As night fell, the room was quiet but alive. They sat together, speaking in soft tones, sharing memories, laughter, and tears. The bond that had been broken, strained, and tested by time was slowly mending. She realized that healing does not happen all at once. It is gradual, patient, and requires openness from both sides. But the first step had been taken, and it was enough to light a path forward. In that quiet evening, surrounded by the presence of the person she had missed for so long, she understood the real power of the letter. It had done more than deliver words. It had delivered truth, clarity, and the possibility of reconciliation. It had brought the past into focus, not to punish, but to guide her toward understanding, forgiveness, and connection. She looked at them and smiled softly, tears still glistening in her eyes. They smiled back, a mirror of shared relief and hope. And in that moment, she knew that while the journey was far from over, They had begun the work that truly mattered, rebuilding trust, embracing honesty, and allowing the love and care that had never vanished to finally take its place in their lives. The letter remained on the table, its words no longer just ink on paper, but a living testament to the power of truth and the resilience of human connection. She knew that it had changed everything, not by erasing the past, but by illuminating it, allowing her to see clearly, to understand deeply, and to move forward with a heart that was open, brave, and full of hope. The days after their reunion were different yet familiar in small, comforting ways. She woke up to mornings that no longer felt heavy with unspoken questions. The letter had done its work. The conversation had revealed the truths she had longed for, and the presence of the person she had missed so dearly brought a warmth she hadn't felt in years. Life didn't suddenly become perfect, but it felt lighter, as if a weight had been lifted from her chest. She began to notice small things that had always been there but that she had never appreciated fully. The sound of laughter when shared, the way a simple conversation could bring relief, the gentle comfort of knowing someone truly understood her. She had carried pain and uncertainty for so long that it had become a part of her daily life, a quiet companion she had learned to accept, but now she realized she didn't need to carry it alone anymore. They spent their days reconnecting slowly. There were long walks through the neighborhood, revisiting streets that held memories of the past. They laughed over old stories and shed tears for moments they had missed. She shared her experiences from the years apart, the challenges, the moments of loneliness, and the times she had doubted herself. And they shared theirs, stories of fear, decisions made in silence, and the love that had persisted despite the distance. Every shared memory, every story, every confession built a bridge between them, strengthening the bond that time had threatened to erode. She discovered things about them she had never known. Small habits, little quirks, ways of thinking and seeing the world that made her smile. And they discovered the ways she had changed, the strength she had gained, the depth of her understanding, and the resilience she had developed. They were not the same people they had been years ago, and yet the connection remained. Stronger now because it had been tested, stretched, and made resilient through absence and time. The letter, which had been the catalyst for everything, now sat on the table in her home, framed in her mind as more than just words. It had been a key to unlock understanding, a bridge to reconciliation, a reminder that truth, once revealed, could heal even the deepest wounds. She often thought about the first line she had read, the one that had made her collapse in tears. She remembered the shock, the disbelief, the flood of emotion that had overtaken her, and she realized that without that moment, none of this would have been possible. The letter had forced her to confront her past, to face her fears, and to open her heart once again. They began to make plans for the future, cautious but hopeful. They knew that the years apart could not simply be erased and that trust and understanding would need time to grow fully. But they were committed to trying. They made promises, not grand or unrealistic, but simple ones, to communicate honestly, to support each other, to acknowledge pain and joy alike, and to allow themselves to be vulnerable without fear. These small promises carried weight, and each day they honored them. The bond between them grew stronger. She began to see changes in herself that she hadn't anticipated. She felt freer, lighter, more capable of embracing life without the shadow of unanswered questions following her every step. She noticed that she laughed more easily, slept more peacefully, and approached each day with a sense of possibility rather than hesitation. The letter and the meeting had not erased the past. They had allowed her to see it clearly, understand it fully, and let it guide her toward growth and healing. Friends noticed the change too. They commented on her renewed energy, her warmth, her willingness to open up and share joy again. She smiled when they said it, but inside she knew it was the result of something far deeper than surface-level happiness. It was the result of confronting truth, embracing understanding, and reconnecting with someone who had always mattered to her, even when life had kept them apart. There were still moments when memories surfaced unexpectedly, when old pain lingered, when doubts crept in. But she no longer felt powerless against them. She had faced the past, seen the truth, and experienced reconciliation. She had learned that pain does not have to define her, that unanswered questions can eventually find answers, and that love, when genuine, endures even through time, distance, and silence. One quiet evening she sat by the window, looking out at the fading sunlight. The letter rested nearby, a constant reminder of the journey she had undertaken. She thought about the first time she had held it, trembling, unsure of what it contained. She thought about the tears, the memories, the shock, the revelation, and the reunion, and she smiled softly. The journey had been long, emotional, and sometimes overwhelming, but it had led her to a place she hadn't dared to imagine: peace, understanding, and hope. She picked up the letter, holding it gently in her hands. She reread the opening lines, the words that had first shaken her world, and she realized something profound. It was not the words themselves that mattered most, but the courage behind them. The courage to reach out, to explain, to reconcile, to be vulnerable after years of absence. That courage had given her the gift of understanding, the gift of connection, and the chance to embrace a future she had once thought impossible. The person sat beside her, quiet, content, sharing the simple comfort of presence. Words were unnecessary. The bond they shared, renewed and strengthened, spoke louder than anything could. She felt gratitude, not just for the letter, not just for the reconciliation, but for the journey itself. Every tear, every fear, every unanswered question had led her here, to a place of clarity and connection that she would never take for granted. As night settled in, she finally let herself relax fully. The house was quiet, the world outside dimming, and she felt a sense of completeness she hadn't known in years. The past was no longer a shadow haunting her. It was a part of her story, acknowledged, understood, and woven into the fabric of her life in a way that made her stronger and wiser. She realized that life is not about avoiding pain or unanswered questions, but about how we respond to them, how we seek truth, and how we allow understanding and love to guide us. The letter had been a catalyst. The meeting had been a turning point, and now the future was hers to shape. She could carry the lessons of the past with her, but she no longer had to carry its burdens alone. In the quiet of the evening, with the letter resting on the table and the person beside her, she felt a profound sense of hope. She understood that healing is gradual, that reconciliation requires courage, and that love can endure even when life tests it. And she knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, she had already faced the hardest part, the truth, the emotions, and the courage to embrace both. And so, in that quiet moment, she smiled fully, without hesitation, without fear, and without regret. The letter had come, the tears had flowed, the truths had been revealed, and the reunion had mended what had been broken. Life had given her a second chance, not to erase the past, but to embrace it, understand it, and move forward with a heart that was open, brave, and full of hope. The journey that began with a single line on a letter had ended in connection, understanding, and healing. She knew that the future would hold both joys and challenges, but for the first time in many years she felt ready to live fully, to love deeply, and to honor both the past and the possibilities ahead. And with that, she closed her eyes for a moment, breathing in the quiet peace of the evening, feeling a sense of completion she had thought impossible. The letter had changed everything, not by rewriting history, but by illuminating it, allowing her to finally step into a life that was hers to embrace, with understanding, love, and hope guiding every step forward.